Strange apparitions haunt the countryside of England. Spirits, it is said, lurk in the meadows that once rang with the sound of life. There are those who swear that the dead have risen. Some hear the sounds of ghostly horses hurtling up the stone stairs of a castle. Others bear witness to the cries of an African prince, outraged because he was buried on English soil. The ancient ghosts of England, it would seem, are the scariest spirits of all. Author-investigator Francis Hitching placed television equipment in a London cellar supposedly haunted by a 17th century cavalier. On a flickering black and white screen, he may have found the last vestiges, the final earthly remnants of a 300-year-old warrior.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanation, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
The English countryside has been populated by so many people for so long a time that it has acquired a rich legacy of spirits and ghosts. A 200-year-old monarch may pace the library of a great fortress. Henry VIII, we are told, still drags his gout-ridden foot through broken cloisters and cobwebbed passages. Long-dead prisoners plead for mercy in empty dungeons. Ancient druids still haunt Stonehenge. Guillotine victims ride across the rolling plains carrying their severed heads. Every generation has added its ghostly collection of vampires, phantoms, and monsters of the netherworld. Today, a roll call of specters stretches the length of the kingdom. Perhaps it is the willingness of its citizens to believe in the supernatural. Whatever the cause, Great Britain, wrote one expert, is the most haunted place on Earth.
Ghosts have a tendency to stay in one place, usually the location of their demise. Since most English castles were built many centuries ago, the apparitions that haunt them have had enough time to scare enough people to become legends. The people who own these castles continue to live in them. Strange sights and hideous noises are considered part of the bargain, along with poor plumbing and drafty rooms.
Ghosts are accepted as eccentric members of the family, and in many cases, they were just that before they died. At Wolverton Manor, for example, we encounter the very rowdy ghost of Lord Thomas Trenchard. His story is told by his descendant, Captain Thimbleby.
In the early 18th century, Thomas Trenchard, after, no doubt, a very good dinner party, with a lot of port in his belly, had a wager with his friend that he could take a horse and carriage up the great stairs, which he indeed did. And in fact, some of the stairs have been repaired where the edges have been chipped off. How on earth he got down again, one doesn't know, but he won his wager, and we hear him going up the stairs every now and again over the years.
The A strange part of Wolverton Manor's ghostly carriage is that it has never been known to return down the stairs. So much for noisy apparitions.
Authentic English ghosts are not known to physically attack people. On numerous occasions, however, they have frightened someone to death. This happened on a lovely country estate in Dorset, and the story is told to us by Emma Leavesley.
My family had owned this house for more than 400 years, I think. And there were legends that something monstrous appeared in the middle of the night and was so frightening that two of my ancestors had actually gone mad after they'd seen it. I hated sleeping there. I used to dread going to bed because I would always have nightmares there, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night and think they were real, and there was definitely something horrible about it. Anyway, one night when my grandmother was a very little girl, which was about 1880 or 1890, she and her sister were living in this house, my grandmother at one end of a corridor, and her sister at the other end, probably the same room that I was in, maybe even the same bed. One night, they went to bed perfectly normally, having said goodnight to each other. And what happened next, no one knows for certain, but it was obviously absolutely horrifying. My grandmother rushed down the corridor to see what was happening. As she opened the door, she thought she caught a glance of something so horrible that she nearly fainted. But it disappeared almost immediately. The worst thing was that when she looked at the bed, her sister had stopped screaming and she was just lying there dead. I hate it as a story, and I wish she'd never told me, really, because I still have nightmares about it, and I'm sure I feel something that that poor girl went through when I've slept in that room.
In most hauntings, sounds are more common than sightings, and ghostly rituals are usually performed by a single figure. But in our next dramatization, both sights and sounds occur, and two 18th century Englishmen are locked together for eternity.
Robin Wordsworth owns Baglake House and keeps alive the story of the double tragedy that took place in 1759.
There was a man who lived here once called Squire William Light, and he had the front of this house built onto an older house in 1719. This we know for a fact. The rest of the story is really legend. The idea is that Squire Light came home from hunting, perhaps a little drunk.
The water was shallow, but deep enough to drown a drunken squire. The squire's groom went searching for his long overdue master. wife found him near the pond. He told her his monstrous tale, then died.
That's the story, and it's still believed in the village. People don't care to walk past this house at night, the younger people. And during the 40 years I've been here, quite a number of level-headed people have felt disturbances of various kinds and seen things and heard footsteps which can't be accounted for.
After years of horrible, unexplained sounds, the local priest attempted to exorcise both Squire Light and the groom from the household. His efforts were partially successful. Local citizens believe that the squire is now confined to the chimney and moans complainingly when the wind blows. The groom, however, lingers outside and faithfully calls his master. Those who share the squire's taste for whiskey claim that they see his specter rising from the pond when the moon is full. As we shall learn in our next story, they should be thankful that he doesn't scream. Most castles are haunted by murky, intangible apparitions. In Marshwood Vale, however, Bettiscombe Manor is haunted by a very tangible human skull that refuses to be buried. When provoked, the skull's angry screams reverberate for miles. Michael Pinney, the current owner of Bettiscombe Manor, is a direct descendant of Azariah Pinney, who was exiled to the West Indies in 1685. While there, he purchased a slave and inadvertently acquired a haunt.
The legend of the Screaming Skull of Bettiscombe is the legend of a Negro slave. There's no doubt about that. And that is how it first grew up. It was the legend of a prince from Africa who was exported, went through the horror of the slave trade, became a slave, came back as a body servant, and he then said to his master, the restitution you've got to see is that I am buried in my own land, not here. I'm a prince in my own country. Well, the legend says that he wasn't buried in his own land. He was taken and buried in Bettiscombe churchyard.
Once buried, horrible screams rose from the grave. Louder and louder they grew until the skull, according to legend, worked its way to the surface. Every attempt to dispose of the skull has brought misfortune to those living in Bettiscombe Manor. As recently as 1914, local witnesses claimed that it has sweated blood. Today, it resides on an attic shelf in silence, at least for now.
The ghosts of England are not restricted to drafty castles and lonely country estates. In the very heart of London, a 17th century cavalier, replete with plumed hat and pantaloons, resides in, of all places, a wine cellar.
In some form, a tavern has operated here for at least 3 centuries. Currently, it is called the George Inn. Bill Grundy is a documentary filmmaker for the British Broadcasting Corporation.
It was the summer of 1975. I'd just finished making a series of television films about the ghosts of London. And I came in here for a drink, and the landlord came over to me, and he said, like the films, pity you didn't do our ghost. I said, you got one here in the George Inn? He said, yes, we have. I said, do you believe in ghosts? He said, no, but my wife does. I asked him to explain. He said, well, we've been here for years, and there'd been no trouble at all. But one day, between 10 and 11 in the morning, anyway, before we opened, he said, my wife went downstairs into the cellar, and she came rushing back up, all white and trembling, and said, I'm never going in the cellar again. She said, it's the fella down there. I said, we're not open yet. There can't be a man down there. And she said, no, this isn't an ordinary fella. He's dressed like a cavalier, and he's standing in the corner of the barrel vaulting there. My wife still doesn't go down that cellar.
Grundy contacted Francis Hitching, an author and investigator of strange phenomena. Hitching placed a camera and a videotape recorder in the supposedly haunted cellar.
I've been investigating ghosts and other related phenomena for a number of years now, and this sounds to me a particularly good and typical example of a ghost. That's to say, we're here in a very old building, one of the oldest basements in London, certainly part of the old London. Up there is the street itself, and I dare say you can hear some noises which come across it from time to time. And the stories that we've heard, the 2 people, the witnesses, talking about somebody in Stuart costume, this is typical of the kind of appearance that you get. Somebody in costume appearing in an old building, sometimes at the same time, sometimes not. And I feel that it's one that's worth investigating with modern equipment.
Hitching sealed the doors from the inside and remained alone in the cellar throughout the night. He focused his camera on a dark pillar in the middle of the room.
Much to my surprise, we have found something. I'd like you to have a look at it. It's a very surprising image which is coming on the screen in just a few moments. Now, I was here at the time that this was taken, and I saw nothing myself. I think I was looking at the pillar at the time that it was there, but look, coming up on the screen is a most extraordinary something. What is it, a light? It may be, if it's a ghost, is that what a ghost looks like? As I say, I think I was looking at the pillar at the time, but there it is emerging on there. Nobody else was here, and it's not an earthly thing. It's nothing that could be created with a torch. It's got curious images which goes up like that. I think it's one of the most remarkable ghostly manifestations that's happened in my experience looking for them. Whether or not it's something that can be the same ghost that's gone away now, whether or not it's the same ghost as they saw, whether it's one of these manifestations that happen sometimes when people go out trying to look for things, and instead of specifically what they're looking for, some other thing appears out of the fabric of the building, I just don't know. Until today, my theory was that under conditions of extreme emotion, that's to say great pain, great anguish, even great happiness, that somehow this emotion imprinted itself in the solid fabric of buildings, and people were able to recognize it, and it came out in the same way that clairvoyants and psychometrists, dowsers, can pick hold of a solid object and tell you a lot of things about the people who were last there. That's until today. But today I've seen this thing, and I can't explain it. And so my explanation yesterday has been torn away. What I believe tomorrow, I just don't know. I'll have to look at that again and again, and perhaps one day I'll find out.
What are ghosts? And why do they keep repeating the same actions over and over again? One theory is that a haunting is a violent release of energy, somehow frozen in space and time. When weather conditions are exactly right, the action is played back, like a recording. Impossible? So were Xeroxing and holography just a few short years ago. In fact, so were videotape replays, like the one you're watching right now. People have been seeing and hearing ghosts for thousands of years. Soon, we may know how and why. What a tremendous gain that would be for science, and what a tremendous loss for storytelling.
She was the most desirable woman in the world, the fabled Helen, wife to the Prince of Sparta. So beautiful was she that a rival prince stole her away to the kingdom of Troy. Thus, Helen became the face that launched 1,000 ships, each ship carrying 100 Greek warriors bent on revenge. For 10 years, the ships were beached while the army laid siege to Troy. The great walls of the city could not be breached, but the Greeks found another way. Were Helen and the Battle of Troy just the dreams of an ancient poet? Homer wrote that Achilles chased Hector around the walls of Troy. 3,000 years later, a man of flesh and blood would relive the chase. He was a man possessed. His mission, find the fabled city and the Trojan hoard of gold.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanation, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
The place where Europe ends and Asia begins is as mysterious as its mountains are imposing. Where they meet the sea, rich farmlands were for centuries protected by great stone battlements. The ancient Greeks called this land Ionia. Modern men call it Turkey.
Relatively few Westerners travel to Turkey these days. Fewer still venture into the exotic countryside beyond the graceful minarets of Istanbul. A long time ago, things were different. What we now call Turkey once seemed to be the great crossroads of the known world. Adventurers from all over the Mediterranean sailed for her shores. What were they looking for?
10 centuries before Christ, the Greeks were just beginning to probe the strange seacoast that lay to the east. The inhabitants of Ionia were said to be rich in precious metals and trade goods from even more distant lands. Eventually, the Greeks would establish colonies, new cities, and a new civilization. Even as the new cities prospered, however, mainland Greece was on the brink of collapse. For a time, the colonies represented the only real hope for the future. The Greek settlers had brought with them their pantheon of gods. Clearly, the Greeks of this troubled period wanted to keep alive the glories of the past. With their gods came mortal heroes, somehow bridging the gulf between heaven and earth. Of these heroes, it was said, each could do what two men could not do, such as now live upon the earth. No one helped preserve these illusions more than the great bard, Homer. Some scholars believe Homer traveled through the great cities of Ionia in the 8th century before Christ. As he would pass through a city, he would pause to recite a tale or hear one told. Under graceful columns and along busy thoroughfares, storytellers would gather to recite verse. Perhaps it was in this way that Homer first heard the story of Troy. He may have visited the place where the great battle was supposed to have happened. Whether Troy's location was known to Homer or not, he certainly drew inspiration for his retelling of the story from the countryside of its birth. The result was Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. The poem describes the invasion of the Greeks, but nowhere does it mention the gift horse filled with soldiers. By the 18th century, most scholars had concluded that the fall of Troy described by Homer was pure fiction or related to something that happened somewhere else. Many felt that Homer never lived at all, that the work ascribed to him was merely an anthology of folk tales told by many writers. There were a few eccentrics, however, who believed otherwise. The most remarkable of these was a self-made millionaire named Heinrich Schliemann. As a boy, Schliemann had taught himself to read the Iliad in Greek. His fascination with Homer's poem was to become a lifelong obsession. By 1870, Schliemann had made 2 fortunes in Russia and another in the California gold fields. He arrived in Turkey determined to spend every penny of his great wealth, if need be, on realizing his dream, the discovery of ancient Troy. When Schliemann committed himself to an objective, it was with an all-consuming passion uncommon in average men. As Schliemann began his search, he looked over the plain that might once have played host to the armies of Hector and Achilles. Schliemann came armed with the Iliad and took up residence in the small village of Bunar-Bashi. The few scholars who were prepared to even consider the possibility that Troy once existed generally placed it here. So he began his survey of the Turkish countryside, looking for landmarks mentioned by Homer. Schliemann had given himself a good layman's education in archaeology. An examination of the area others thought likely revealed nothing to his eye that could possibly relate to Homer's Troy. The springs which Homer described weren't of much help either. Surely their course must have changed dozens of times in the 30 or more centuries since Troy. Before giving up on Bunar-Bashi, Schliemann decided on another test. Homer had said precisely how long it took Achilles to chase Hector around the walls. There was only one thing for Schliemann to do. Wrong. The time was wrong. Bunar-Bashi just didn't fit Homer's facts. Schliemann's detractors had a field day, more convinced than ever that he was a fool or simply crazy. Even Schliemann had to admit he'd picked a big haystack in which to search for his needle. But a grocer's apprentice who had the brains and energy to make himself a multi-millionaire doesn't quit easily. He began to search again, a short distance north of Bunarbashi. There, he would encounter his destiny on a hill called Hissarlik. The site was less than an hour's march from the sea. If well fortified, it could command the whole plain below. Even an eye less astute than his couldn't miss the archaeological evidence. Schliemann was convinced he had realized a 40-year-old dream. In his journal, he wrote, "I have set foot on Trojan soil at last." He selected the highest mound on Hissarlik and ordered his men to dig. Homer had said the Temple of Athena stood on the highest ground in the city, ringed by walls built by the gods. Still, the critics scoffed. Although Schliemann had taught himself to read and write 18 languages, the scholars of the day dismissed him as an unlettered boor, living in a fantasy world. Schliemann only worked harder, driving his men to dig deeper into the mound. Surely now he would find the proof to quiet those who laughed. Find it he did. Here, indisputably, were the remnants of a lost civilization. But were they the fabled walls of Troy? Schliemann's trove of artifacts shook the academic world. What must the builders of this city have been like? What hands made these beautiful things? Clearly, the ancient craftsmen used techniques more advanced than many in use today. Why did they vanish after accomplishing so much? Schliemann discovered hundreds of spindle whorls, just like the ones still favored by local residents for spinning wool yarn. Other implements were found, similar, if not identical, to those in everyday use by villagers along the Turkish coast. Schliemann might have been struck by how little some things change in 3,000 years. But he would need more to prove his city was the Troy of Homer. Heinrich Schliemann's life had been one long love affair with the legend of Troy. It had taken 4 years to excavate the ruin he thought was Troy. Now, as he walked its ancient pavements, he believed he was following the path Homer had taken so long ago. Schliemann seeing, as through Homer's eyes, the skilled Trojan craftsmen at work in their stalls. Touching a dish that might have been set before Helen, the hostage princess who spawned 10 years of war. Admiring a lion's head carved in crystal. What great warrior might have carried it as a charm into battle? Schliemann could place on his own hand a ring made 30 centuries ago. Restore a brush whose bristles had turned to dust in the age of gods who walked with men. Still, Schliemann was not satisfied. He had in fact discovered 9 cities. He had no way of knowing for sure which one was the city of his dreams. Some early inhabitants imported bronze cast in ingots the shape of ox hides. There were ship's anchors of chiseled stone and ship's cook stoves of bronze. These Schliemann found in the ruin he called Troy too. But was this Homer's Troy? The answer was obscured by evidence of a great catastrophe. violence more terrible than war had seared the very masonry of the walls. Jewelry was fused into shapeless blobs of metal. The whole countryside must have been laid waste by the disaster. Those who survived lived in squalor, the floors of their huts built on compacted garbage. If nothing else, Schliemann had unearthed a monument to the tenacity of man. Fire and sword had raged. Again and again, a city of the living had been raised on a city of the dead. Schliemann numbered the ruins from 1 for the oldest to 9 for the most recent. He assumed his objective was among the older ruins, possibly Troy 2. Yet in Troy 6, he found massive walls that could have been the ones described by Homer. If they were the walls that hid Helen from the armies of her betrayed husband, it would be easy to see why the battle raged 10 years. It all seemed to fit Homer's description. A city fashioned by the gods. Yet the design of houses in Troy 6 was remarkably similar to those of the more ancient second city. A major difference among the various ruins seemed to be evidence of the increasing influence of outside cultures. By the time of Troy 6, newcomers from the north were introducing a completely new kind of pottery. The other arts were also affected by the immigrants. Alexander the Great was a latecomer to Troy, but among the first to build an altar to the old gods. From inscriptions, it is clear Alexander read Homer as fact. More years passed, and the Romans became masters of the Ionian coast. The poet Virgil took up in Latin where Homer left off in Greek, embellishing the story and giving it new credibility. Rome made Troy a sacred city. Emperors came to worship and be entertained. Augustus even considered making Troy the capital of his empire. Through it all, minstrels kept alive Homer's poem of glory. This was the world Heinrich Schliemann felt he had rediscovered. But was he seeing only what he wanted to see? So complete was Schliemann's dedication to Homer's Troy that he had taken a young Greek woman to be his bride. He thought she had Helen's blood coursing through her veins. And in a way, all this effort had been intended to restore her heritage. The greatest prize he had not been able to give her. Yet as he was about to give up, Schliemann made his most fantastic discovery. The glint of metal had caught his eye. Schliemann ordered his wife to send the workers away. Sophia was confused, but she had come to trust her husband's uncanny instincts. She did as she was told.
Paydos, paydos. Gidebilirsiniz. Kocamın yaş günü bugün. Hey, paydos, paydos, paydos.
In 4 years, Schliemann's men had moved 325,000 cubic yards of earth. Now, he was moving alone, deep into the excavation of the ancient second city. 28 feet down was the lower level of the walls Schliemann identified with Homer's Palace of Troy. It was here he had seen the flash of treasure. Schliemann had chanced everything for his dream. Even with all he'd accomplished, scholars still considered him a fraud or a madman. Now, he knew they would have to believe him. The treasure of Troy was surely only inches from his grasp. Then, his fingers touched it. There were 31 large objects of beaten gold. Had this once adorned Helen, daughter of the gods? The workmanship was unmistakable. Surely this was all the proof the world would need. The hoard included 9,000 small pieces, rings, buttons, and charms. It was wealth beyond imagining. More important, it seemed that a lifetime's quest had finally been realized. In spite of promises to share the treasure with the Turkish government, Schliemann smuggled most of it out of the country. He held onto it long enough to dress Sophia in splendor. Somehow, Schliemann knew he had fulfilled his destiny and hers by finding the lost treasure of Troy. The collection eventually found its way to the Berlin Museum. Schliemann would go on to other triumphs in archaeology. The Trojan treasure, however, would vanish. In the closing days of World War II, the Americans and the Russians marched on Berlin from opposing flanks. The museum fell under Russian control, but the treasure was already gone. Someone may have hidden it from the bombardment, then died without revealing the secret of its location. It's possible the Nazis stole it for their own use in the headlong flight from the advancing Allies. No one really knows. Happily, perhaps, Schliemann didn't live to see the day that the prize he struggled so hard to win would vanish again without a trace. Little has changed in Turkey in the 100 years since Heinrich Schliemann came here to play out his dream of finding Troy. Caravans still follow trade routes that were ancient even in Homer's day. Old men still sit in the shade and tell stories. It is the custom here, and was so long before Homer's time. Tragedy and disaster are also familiar in this fabled land. In 1976, an earthquake killed hundreds of people and left thousands homeless. There was no warning, just sudden and savage destruction. A dazed and heartbroken people began to rebuild, even as they mourned their dead. Modern archaeologists believe the same fate overtook ancient Troy. That around 1300 BC, a violent earthquake leveled the mighty city. Before the city could be rebuilt, barbarians attacked from the north and put the survivors to the sword. Perhaps we can be forgiven for preferring to believe that Troy met its end gloriously and for the sake of love. The heart of an average human being beats 72 times a minute. These, however, are not ordinary human beings. They are the Mayans. Their hearts beat only 50 times a minute. Their teeth do not decay. Their skull cavities are different from any other human beings. They are the descendants of an extraordinary people who long ago created an astonishing civilization. Then they vanished. Where did they come from? Why did their civilization flourish, then disappear? This ancient observatory suggests a knowledge of astronomy that rivals anything we know today. Yet it was built more than 1,000 years ago. Who designed it? Where did they get their knowledge? Most puzzling of all, where did they go?
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanation, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
The biblical story of Genesis and the theory of evolution agree. In the beginning, out of the void came light, the great creative force. Eventually, light separated from darkness, becoming the first day. And from this great expanse, the sky was created and dry land emerged from the deep. Earth, the great mother, giving birth to all kinds of vegetation, the marsh and mud landscape was transformed into mountains and lakes. Finally, the expanse of sky was filled with lights, separating day from night. The movement of the stars marked the passage of time, the recurring cycles of the days, the seasons, the years. The waters brought forth life. Swarms of living creatures filled the seas. Birds and other winged life filled the skies. All sorts of beasts and crawling things populated the land. It was into this setting that mankind was born. Living simply at first, mankind grappled with the problems of survival, seeking warmth and the guidance of the stars. Building only the simplest of shelters against the elements. In most cases, civilization developed slowly, but there appears to be an exception. Deep within the jungles of Mexico and Guatemala, a culture emerged unlike any other. At Tikal, the sacred heart of the Mayan world, pyramids stand as ancient links between earth and sky. Why did this ancient people build such elaborate ceremonial complexes? Pre-Columbian scholar and poet Al Urista believes the Maya to be the oldest culture in the world.
The pyramids that these people built were centers of learning. They were places where men and women were to become creators, masters of energy, masters of matter and energy. People who would learn in those centers how to transform matter and energy. They were also initiatory chambers, not open to everybody. These secret societies were dedicated to the study of astronomy based on mathematics.
No evidence has been found to explain the Mayan advances in astronomy and mathematics. The silent sentinels they left behind indicate only the methods they used to mark the passage of time. They could easily compute the exact day of the week a given date would fall 400 million years later. Ancient Mayans devised a unique numbering system. They used dots to signify 1, bars for 5, and a simple stylized shell for 0. Thus, they anticipated our decimal system by thousands of years. In 1947, Giles Healy made an extraordinary discovery. In a small temple, in a seemingly unimportant religious center called Bonampak, Healy found a gold mine of information about Mayan ceremonial life. In 3 small chambers, he uncovered a series of exquisite murals documenting the pageantry of a 1,000-year-old religion. The murals tell of a grand processional of music and masked dancers who appear to be impersonating mysterious gods, perhaps in the hopes of winning their favor. There is a raid on a nearby village. Captives are taken. Prisoners sacrificed. Significantly, there is always present one commanding figure, the priest astronomer. The Palace Observatory at Palenque reveals the priests to be preoccupied with the study of the stars and preserving the ancient sacred mysteries. Long before Columbus, Mayan men of knowledge filled libraries with hundreds of books on their history and the complex cycles of the planets. These books were important because the priests believed that history repeats itself. Carefully recorded events were for them a guide to the future.
The Mayan written language is still largely undeciphered. One day, it might provide answers to some puzzling questions. This toy crocodile is evidence that the wheel was known to the early Mayans, but they made no practical use of it. Why?
The priest scientist directed the building of an elaborate road system. The longest cuts an absolutely straight line, 62 miles through the jungle. One wonders about the spiritual motivation behind the construction of this complex network linking sacred cities. One road ends at Uxmal, the oldest Mayan city in the Yucatan Peninsula. It can be seen as a colossal monument to one thing, the snake. Al Urista explains.
The basic assumptions about life in the universe were that nothing is static on Earth. Everything moves, and everything that moves has a measure. And everything that has a measure moves in a spiral. Nothing moves in a straight line. This is the way they conceived energy, and that's why they call themselves the Chan clan. Chan simply means snake.
In the north, the snake cult reached its greatest power, symbolized by a new god called Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. Mayan folklore holds that Kukulkan was a bearded, light-skinned man who brought a renaissance to citadels like Chichen Itza and provided the Mayans with a highly advanced knowledge of engineering and astronomy. From Chichen Itza's observatory, the Mayan priests, it was said, read the future in the patterns of the stars. In ancient times, Chichen Itza was a thriving ceremonial center, a place of pilgrimage where Mayans came to worship and enjoy society. While the priests were careful to attend to their civic responsibilities, they were forever seeking ways to provide spiritual guidance for their subjects. To that end, Kukulkan erected a perfect calendar temple. A pyramid with 364 steps leading up to the temple, which represents the 365th day of the tropical year. Legend has it that Kukulkan understood the power of the snake.
He thus translated this power and energy into a recurring architectural phenomenon. Twice a year, on the spring and fall equinox at precisely 5 p.m., the sun reveals a serpent slithering down the temple's balustrade, dramatically announcing the end of one seasonal cycle and the beginning of another. According to legend, the enlightened Kukulkan disappears and black sorcerers come from the north. At the sacred well, archaeologists have dredged up hundreds of human bones. The Mayans believed that only the most perfect children were pure enough for the gods. Ancient Mayans played the first known team sport in history. For them, it had terrifying consequences. It was played by priests on a huge ball court linked astronomically to a map of the heavens. Without using hands or feet, the object was to send a rubber ball through a small ring set high on the wall. Winning was so rare that victors were rewarded with all the spectators' possessions. Losing meant that the players were put to death. Then it appears that suddenly the priests left the temples. Did Mayan astronomers see a different age in the stars? Was it the end of a cosmic cycle? No one knows for sure. It is a strange and fascinating puzzle. The answer may be found in an incredible drama played out in an obscure place by men who served a different god. The ancient Mayans abandoned their sacred cities hundreds of years before the arrival of the Spanish in the New World. When the Spaniards came, they were awed by the architectural triumph of Mayan cities and at the same time mystified by the radically different people who had built them. The coming of the Spanish friars cemented the Spanish conquest of the Yucatan. The conquistadores came to battle foreign soldiers. The friars came to battle foreign gods. Gathering up all the Mayan archives, all the chronicles of this ancient wisdom, the friars came together at Mani. Alarista laments the occasion.
The Mayan books were burnt during the conquest by the religious zeal of the Christians led by Bishop Landa. This is a terrible catastrophe given the fact that the Mayas constitute the oldest civilization in the world. It's interesting to note that that religious zeal, that antagonism against Mayan knowledge was sourced in the Mayan use of the snake. The Christians associated the snake with the devil. And seeing that the Mayas had the snake in every single one of their sculptures, in every single one of their halls, in their clothing, in their jewelry, they concluded that these people were children of the devil, and that any information or knowledge associated with these people was obviously the knowledge of the devil that had to be destroyed.
Now the conquest was utter and complete. The destruction of Mayan knowledge was ruthless and would forever frustrate scholars by its loss. If there was ever a key to the mysterious hieroglyphic writing, it is gone, and we are left to speculate about the strange disappearance of this remarkable civilization. Some scholars have suggested that the Mayan leadership was decimated by malaria and yellow fever, yet these diseases seem to have been unknown in ancient times. Others contend that the priests were cast out by rebellious elements within the empire, but there is no archaeological evidence to support that conclusion. Another possible explanation is that the Mayans moved to escape a natural catastrophe, perhaps an earthquake. The area is known for them. Guatemala City sits on a 40-million-year-old fault. On February 4th, 1976, at 3:04 a.m., the Earth shook with such a violence that it resulted in one of the worst disasters to ever hit the Western Hemisphere. 90 times stronger than the quake that leveled Managua, Nicaragua in 1972, it was felt along a 2,000-mile strip of Central America, right through the heart of the ancient Mayan world. The quake fractured the land, reducing a great city to rubble. It destroyed 20% of all buildings and left more than 1 million homeless. In the end, 23,000 died. Yet, even with such a history of earthquakes, people do not seem to have been discouraged from building and settling along this ancient fault line. Some believe that the Mayans abandoned their lands because of crop failure. They simply depleted the soil and had to move on. For thousands of years, Mayan peasants have been beating back the jungle, burning out cornfields. Even today, corn makes up 80% of the Mayan diet. Crop failure is a horrendous disaster. But Al Arista is unconvinced. He dismisses such easy explanations as earthquake and crop failure.
The pre-scientists were able to predict earthquakes as well as the kind of weather conditions that would be propitious for a specific kernel of corn. And there were 28 kernels of corn developed for specific weather conditions. These people had developed a socialist, a communistic society where everything that was raised by the people was distributed to the people according to their need.
Others have suggested that changing climate could account for the sudden disappearance of the ancient Mayans. Al Arista also believes this unlikely.
They also use psychic energy in order to attract clouds in the event of drought, so that the idea of rain dance is not really a very far out idea if you understand it in terms of psychic energy. The Mayas had a very good reason for building their pyramids on these energy grids, because this enabled them to awaken psychic energy within initiates that came to these art centers. The Maya Itzay disappeared mysteriously, but they did not leave the earth. They simply concluded a cycle of civilization and took off to the east. The journey to the east starts right here in the peninsula de Yucatan. It is from this peninsula that they cross the sea, stop in Egypt, into the Red Sea, go up towards Nepal. It was there that they started their second cycle of civilization. One of the colonies of the Maya Itzay was to be found at the foot of the Dead Sea, where the monastery of the Essenes was located. It was there that Jesus learned about the philosophy of the world.
Al Arista offers a startling conclusion.
The last words of Christ on the cross were not Aramaic words, they were stylized Mayan words, and they did not mean, "Oh God, why have thou forsaken me?" They meant, "At last I sink in the dawn of your presence."
Today, little survives of the old practices and beliefs. For a civilization once first among all those in the world, there remains only ruins and a cave, an ancient house of worship. The priestly knowledge it contained is lost, forgotten. Perhaps the ancient Mayans anticipated this when they wrote long ago, "All moons, all years, all days, all winds take their course and pass away." The ancient Mayans, men of knowledge, conceived their time on Earth, their cycle of civilization, to be 5,200 years. Beginning their calendar August 12th, 3113 BC, they predicted that on December 24th, 2011 AD, a cataclysmic earthquake would terminate their cycle of civilization. New men of knowledge would then appear to fight the forces of evil and lead the people to create a world government. If the Mayan men of knowledge were right, in just 34 years, we may learn the answers to some of the ancient Mayan mysteries. Lost civilization, extraterrestrials, myths and monsters, missing persons, magic and witchcraft, unexplained phenomena. In search of cameras are traveling the world, seeking out these great mysteries. This program was the result of the work of scientists, researchers, and a group of highly skilled technicians. On a sunny day in July 1977, Aaron Neely was water skiing with Ed Fletcher and his daughter in Canada's Lake Okanagan. As shown in this reenactment, Aaron was an expert and had skied these waters many times. Neither Ed nor his daughter was alarmed when Aaron took a spill, but they were when she started screaming. Safely in the boat, young Aaron told a terrifying story of coming face to face with a huge serpent-like monster. Aaron was not the first person to see such a creature in Lake Okanagan, nor the last.
It was a long creature, about 2 feet wide and about 40 feet in length, was on the top of the water.
And it was just incredible the way it moved.
His head seemed to be the shape of a snake.
Eyewitnesses claim that a monster rises from the depths and surfaces unexpectedly. They call him Ogopogo.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
Many believe that a mysterious monster lives in the depths of Loch Ness in Scotland. This ancient ruin marks the spot where St. Columba first sighted the creature in 565 AD. Loch Ness, however, is not the only place where forbidding monsters are reported to dwell. In British Columbia, Lake Okanagan is reputed to be the home of a giant water creature similar to the one in Loch Ness. Both lakes are remarkably alike, lying at almost the same latitude. Both are long and narrow, having areas of great depth. Both were formed by cataclysmic shifts of the Earth's crust. They have similar temperatures and contain almost identical types of fish. This is a famous picture claimed to be of the Loch Ness Monster. The head bears a striking resemblance to that of a prehistoric creature. Reports of beasts of immense length indicate that creatures like these may still exist. But how could it be possible for them to survive undetected for millions of years? If such creatures unknown to science do indeed exist, what could they be? Fish, mammal, reptile, or some species long thought to be extinct? 40 years ago, the scientific world was stunned by the discovery of a coelacanth, a fish believed to have been extinct for 60 million years. Not only was it very much alive, but many times larger than any of its ancestors. If such a discovery happened once, could it not happen again? On the surface, Lake Okanagan presents a scene of calm beauty, but this view can change in a moment. Winds rise seemingly from nowhere, whipping the lake into a fury. Can it be that below this changeable surface dwells a creature rivaling the famous Loch Ness Monster? The Okanagan Indians have lived near the shores of the lake for centuries, long before the white man. Like all Indians, they hold a deep reverence for nature, believing that all of creation is part of the plan of the Great Spirit. The Indians of Okanagan both respect and fear their lake. Many of their legends are built around it. These legends are passed down around the campfires from generation to generation.
And this lake is like a living sacred thing. In an hour or 2 hours, this lake can be a raging body of water, and very dangerous. In this lake, we have the Ncha'cha'itk. It's a serpent that lives in the water, and it's been told to me by my great-grandfather, and told to him by his ancestors.
In early times, according to legend, no Indian would attempt to cross Lake Okanagan without first offering a small animal to the lake monster. There are stories of those who failed to make such offerings and whose horses were sucked under by a mysterious force. Stories of canoes wrecked and scattered on the rocks. The Indian's offering can be viewed as a spiritual act of sacrifice or as the pragmatic act of appeasing a hungry monster. At the Kelowna Museum near Lake Okanagan, we talked with curator Ursula Surtees, who has devoted years to the study of the local Indian culture.
Naha'tik lived about midway down Okanagan Lake in a little cabin underneath Squally Point. And Ogopogo, or Naha'tik, was a creature that had to be appeased whenever the occasion arose. Many people have cast some doubts as to whether Ogopogo was really there, but the Indian people have for years known about Ogopogo, and we have learned over a long period of time that Indian legends, for the most part, have a very substantial amount of fact and truth in them.
Mary Moon is the author of Ogopogo, the Okanagan Mystery.
I first came up into this lake country in 1972 as assistant editor of a magazine to write 7 or 8 stories about this area. And everywhere I went up and down the valley, they kept saying this funny word, Ogopogo, Ogopogo. And I said, what's an Ogopogo? And they said, oh, the snake in the lake. And I said, what? They said, the snake in the lake. And I said, please tell me about it. And they rounded up half a dozen people, 7 or 8 people, of stunning respectability and great enthusiasm and great sincerity. And they told me their stories, and they all hung together.
We launched our boat at Peachland.
Harry and Betty Staines have often cruised these waters.
About 1/3 of the way across, we noticed a commotion in the water to our right, and we turned our boat in that direction. When we got near this area, we noticed this huge creature emerge from the water and was swimming in a northerly direction.
When I looked at it, I was just scared to death. It looked so huge. And I remember in particular the fins on the top of it, the bone structures, you know, was just so, really stood out, the white bone structure. And I said, oh, it's got fins, you know, and I said to Harry, let's not go any closer. It just may tip the boat over. It was so big.
We've been holidaying in this area for the past 30 years with our family. We've heard of Ogopogo, but we never believed in it. But Betty and I are real believers now that there's a huge creature in this lake.
Jeffrey Sherwin remembers.
It was a calm day, just like it is today. We were fishing on the lake, my son David, myself, and his 2 friends. Parallel to the shore, we were trolling when one of the boys shouted, look at that funny-looking wave. I turned and looked at the strangest-looking thing I'd ever seen in my life. I saw 2 humps sticking out of the water, heading for shore. We watched it for a full 3 minutes. As the object, whatever it was, reached the shore, it was 5 feet short of the shore. I expected to see it walk up out of the water when the whole thing sank. I don't know what it was, but I think I saw Ogopogo. I've been ridiculed about this many times since, but I'll tell you right now, there's no way that I'd make a liar out of my son and his friends.
The first time
Ed Fletcher and his daughter Jill.
Jill and I were idling out in the bay there, and we were about 2 blocks from the shore, and all of a sudden this huge mound came up in front of us, and we shut the boat off, and by the time that the boat had stopped, we had almost coasted up to within reaching distance of it. And that particular day, we chased Ogopogo for about an hour and a half, and out of an hour and a half, we got 5 pictures.
We saw just around 50 feet out, just one hump. There was just one hump there. I guess it would have been around 3 feet high, and it was dark.
And one of the reasons we believe that we've seen it so many times is because of the boat. The boat has an electrical current developed by the motor going through into the rudder. And this creates what they call electrolysis. And electrolysis is a high amperage which attracts marine life. And the first year that we went out, we thought we were chasing Ogopogo, but we find that Ogopogo's attracted to the boat and it's following us. We've seen Ogopogo 40 or 50 times.
At first glance, Ed Fletcher's pictures look like a wave. But a closer look reveals something much more difficult to explain. Intrigued by Ed Fletcher's pictures, our camera team decided to explore beneath the surface of Lake Okanagan in search of the Ogopogo monster. Cal Bevan, in red scuba gear, is a local diver who's made many attempts to find the monster. He agreed to try again. Our cameraman is Barry Heron, an expert underwater photographer. As the lake is over 80 miles long, his chance of filming the monster is slim.
Yeah.
They decided to dive in the area where Ed Fletcher stated he had sighted Ogopogo many times.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll give it a whirl and, okay, let's fire up.
It was near this spot that young Aaron Neely reported a face-to-face confrontation with the monster. the heavy underwater camera and housing becomes buoyant and easy to handle below the surface. Strangely, no fish were found in an area where they are known to feed, and after a long and careful search, no monster. At least none in this section of the lake. Hoping for new information, a public meeting was announced through the local press. We were amazed by the number of people who related unusual sightings.
How many people have seen Ogopogo here? How many people in this crowd have seen? Hold your hand up. Good.
It was a hot summer morning, and the lake was just like a mirror. And when my mother and I saw it, was between Trout Creek Point and Summerland. And this head came up out of the water like a huge horse's head. And the back of it was quite calm. The lake was still there. Then its head went down, and the back of it just lashed like this, and I would estimate it would be about 35 feet long.
And the whole thing I seen, head and all. And boy, he all at once, he went down. He must have seen me. He went down, and the waves all. Another guy by the name of Ed, he's not here anymore. He's in Prince George. He stopped behind me. And he says, what did you see? I just seen Ogopogo. And all at once he says, gee, look at the waves in there. I says, yeah, I just seen Ogopogo, the whole thing, I says. He didn't believe me. He says, but, oh, it's true. It must be true then. So we says, let's go to the Willow Inn for coffee. And we went down the Willow Inn and told everybody, you're crazy, you're crazy. What have you been drinking? I says, nothing. I says, I just seen Ogopogo. They didn't believe me, eh?
Obviously, these people had seen something. But moving images reflected in the water can be deceiving.
Well, I grow grapes across the lake, and I was sitting on my tractor cultivating my vineyard, and I looked down in the water, and there was a big black, looked like a big black log about 50 or 60 feet long. So I stopped the tractor, and I thought, well, maybe I should go down there and cut that up because I'm looking for some cedar posts. A few minutes later, some little waves started coming from my log, and I thought, well, that thing must be alive. And suddenly, it started up, made a huge circle, and a terrific lashing of water, and then two coils came out of the water about 4 or 5 feet high, and they were the most beautiful green you have ever seen.
We were part of a large group on a family picnic sort of thing in the summertime, and about 6 o'clock in the evening, the water was all quiet and calm, much as it is right now, and all of a sudden it started to churn.
Yes, it was definitely something serpentine about this creature. It made its own wake behind it.
Waves from passing boats often take 5 minutes to reach the shore. Could such waves appear to be large humps moving through the water?
It had 3 humps, and it looked like the shadow of a tail at the back.
One day, our crew was the victim of a hoax. Someone with a sense of humor tied 3 tires together.
For a moment, the In Search of camera team thought they'd seen Ogopogo. Even allowing for optical illusions, there's much that is difficult to explain away in the many sightings. One thing is certain, the sincerity of the people interviewed. Ed Fletcher, for example, has spent a great deal of time and money continuing his own investigation.
Do I understand that you saw a creature in the lake that had texture something like the skin of this shark that's swimming past here?
Yes, very much similar, sir. Very smooth and shiny.
No scales?
No, very similar to the shark and very similar to a whale skin.
Have you seen sharks and whales up close?
Oh, yes, I have.
In an attempt to identify what he had seen, Ed met with Willard Bascom, director of the Southern California Coastal Waters Research Project. Beside the tanks at a nearby museum, Fletcher compared the monster he had seen with some of the aquarium's underwater creatures.
Oh, no, it swam this way.
Side to side?
Yeah. This creature we saw didn't have fins. When it was swimming, it would show mounds in the water, only because of the way it was swimming like a snake.
Ed learned that whales are capable of withstanding sudden and extreme changes of depths and pressures. But whales are saltwater mammals, not likely to be found in a mountain lake. Some believe Ogopogo to be a giant eel. Eels are known to grow to lengths of 20 feet, and they do inhabit freshwater lakes. One theory states that eunuch eels with little or no sex drive do not participate in the mating migration, but remain feeding on the bottom of lakes and grow to enormous size. Could Ogopogo be one of these? As their first attempt was inconclusive, our divers decide to try again. This time off Squally Point, where Indian legends tell of the cave-like home of the lake monster. As the divers descended, the water grew painfully cold. Amid the rocks, our divers found many cavernous openings, but no signs of Ogopogo living in any of them. Unable to capture the monster on film, our searchers had one more contact to make. The authoress of Beneath the Depths, Arlene Gall, who owns the only known motion picture footage reputed to be of Ogopogo.
The most conclusive evidence that I personally feel that we have on the Ogopogo is the fold-in film. The fold-in film actually shows a large animate object surfacing, submerging, and propelling itself through the waters at a very high speed. There is very little doubt in my mind that there is a creature or creatures of massive size beneath the depths of Okanagan Lake.
We optically enlarged the film, and on close examination, there was indeed a large object moving through the water, as shown by the white foam. Professor Willard Bascom comments on the conditions necessary for the development of a monster.
One of the difficult problems is this is in a fairly small lake, which is only 90 miles long and 2 or 3 miles wide, and it just doesn't seem likely that you could have developed any animal quite so large in the relatively short time available since that lake was frozen solid during the ice ages. It just seems very unlikely to me. I do believe that in the open ocean there's probably lots of very large animals that are so rarely seen by man, sea monsters if you will, animals of a certain kind which are much larger than any others like that have ever been seen. All animals have certain problems of getting oxygen and of feeding and of living through the winter time and of mating and raising young and all the other things. And all of those things still need to be described about this particular creature, whatever it may be. But there's no question there are very large animals in the sea which are only rarely seen. So anything might be a sea monster if it grew to a very unusual size.
The persistent question remains. What is it so many reliable witnesses say they've seen in the lake? Could so many people be wrong?
Whether the creature is something known or unknown, it's difficult to ignore these pictures and the large number of sightings of a creature scientists cannot explain. What it is, we still don't know. Perhaps someday, a scientific expedition will tell us. In the meantime, the fold-in film provides us with the most conclusive evidence that something very large lives in Lake Okanagan. Arizona's Superstition Mountains have been a magnet for generations of adventurers and treasure hunters. Many who come to the mountains seeking riches never return.
In 1860, a miner called the Dutchman staggered out of the mountains more dead than alive. Something had kept him going when others would have given up. He had been tortured by Indians and seen his partner murdered. For days, he had traveled alone under the blazing sun. What was the secret that gave him the strength to survive? It was treasure, great nuggets of gold. The Dutchman said he'd found a mine full of it. He would never be strong enough to go back for more, however, and the secret of the mine's location went with him to the grave. The rugged and barren Superstition Mountains are sacred to Apache Indians. They say the thunder god lives here in a gold-filled cave. To trespass in the hallowed cave is to activate a terrible curse. The Apache believe that only they can travel safely through the superstitions.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
Search for treasure in the Superstition Mountains begins at Weaver's Needle. The remnant of an ancient volcano, it has become a beacon for adventurers. Some treasure hunters believe the megalith marks the center of a magic circle that contains the untold wealth of a lost civilization. Long before magic powers were attributed to the area, Spain's conquistadors penetrated the mountains searching for the legendary kingdom of Cibola. They believed Cibola was composed of 7 cities made from pure gold. The Spaniards even resorted to torture to pry information from the natives. The Apache has always related differently to the superstitions. They only say the mountains hide a sacred cave protected by a curse, guarded by rattlesnakes, charged with lightning bolts. Some say the Dutchman tore his treasure from the walls of the secret Apache cave. The Dutchman did claim that his partner was murdered. Perhaps it was an act of Apache vengeance. Gold has always inspired some men to acts of violence and great sacrifice. Ancients thought the metal had magic powers, that gold harnessed the energy of the sun. For centuries, alchemists tried to create gold in their crucibles. The secret always eluded them. Today we know that gold is one of nature's basic elements. It can't be broken down into any simpler substance, nor will it readily combine with another element. Thus, gold endures for all time, to be sought after and measured out as the universal symbol of wealth.
Since the Dutchman staggered out of the mountains with his sack of gold nuggets, no significant strike has been made in the superstitions. Yet the seekers keep coming, in spite of the lack of evidence, the harshness of the country, and the history of tragedy for those who've come before. It's an obsession, seemingly shared by most gold hunters. Some look for lost mines, like the Dutchman's. Others are after the legendary vein of pure gold, flowing like a river of yellow metal from the planet's molten core. This they call the Mother Lode.
Once, prospectors had only intuition and simple tools to pursue their quest. Now they have metal detectors and Geiger counters. Intuition still plays a big part. Pat Bowl is a retired science professor, recently turned prospector. His intuition paid off with an offer of $15,000 for an unusual sample of gold-bearing rock.
I got 13.9 this spring when I sold it, gave some to the government, and ended up with $9,000 for 20 minutes work with a pick. This will make a prospector out of anybody.
Pat Bull may never find the vein of pure gold, but he has that fever now called the gold bug. It has driven other men to chip, blast, and burrow in the earth, searching for the ultimate source. The stampede that follows a strike is called a gold rush. In 1878, a rush hit Bodie, California like a flash flood. Known only as a place where miners could occasionally scrape out enough ore to live on, Bodie suddenly became a boom town, producing $200,000 a month in gold bullion. The town grew from a 3-family prospector camp to a thriving community of 800 buildings and 10,000 people almost instantly. Two years after it began, the boom was over. A year later, the town was nearly empty. How often this phenomenon occurred across the gold fields isn't known for sure. No one remembers what happened to camps like Sucker Town, Gauge Eye, Red Dog, and Hardtack. The gold didn't last long enough for them to have a past, much less a future. Today, many treasure hunters hear echoes of the gold rush and believe any one of 1,000 tunnels that perforate the western mountains could tap the mother lode, or the Lost Dutchman's mine. While preparing his book on the Dutchman legend, Robert Blair studied gold miners and dreamers. He concludes that without mineral evidence, miners wouldn't search the superstitions for gold. Dreamers, however, might.
I suppose people go looking for the Lost Dutchman for their own reasons. I can only speculate what those reasons are, but I think that a great many of these people who search in such an unpromising location for gold as the superstitions are going more for the adventure than they are for any serious expectation of finding a rich gold mine. I think they're going for their own reasons as far as their own psychology is concerned, but perhaps it's an acting out of fantasy. It's one of the few places in the United States today which is unchanged. It's a wilderness area. There are no motor vehicles in there. It's almost like the old Wild West, when men went in with guns, fought it out among themselves, looking for a lost mine. Maybe the threat of Apaches is in the minds of some of these men. Maybe the man finds that when he's in the mountains that he becomes another person. He becomes more manly. The machismo effect may be working in the minds of those men who dig so endlessly in the superstitions and so fruitlessly. In 1931, an event took place which focused national attention on the superstitions. And this, apparently, is what has preserved the legend to this day.
On a scorching summer day, a retired Washington bureaucrat, Adolph Ruth, rode into the superstitions. Carrying maps he believed would pinpoint the Lost Dutchman mine, he struck out for Weaver's Needle. A 66-year-old greenhorn, Ruth had no idea of the danger he faced. He'd spoken freely about his maps, saying he was confident they were genuine. Ruth seemed oblivious to the temptation his maps represented. 6 months from the day he set out with his cowboy guides, an archaeological party would find Ruth's skull. News of Ruth's mysterious death would not discourage others from trying. Hundreds would come to the superstitions looking for the now famous Dutchman mine. Like Ruth, many would find only tragedy. The superstitions have claimed hundreds of lives. Every year, the toll climbs. Some perish from too much sun and lack of water. Some die violently and mysteriously. Sightseers usually seek out an experienced guide for survival. Treasure hunters, however, only want help to reach a specific point. For many who go on alone, packmaster and guide Jerry Crater is the last man they will ever see.
I've been running a packing business in this country with my brother since 1968, 69. We pack prospectors, tourists, sightseers, but a large end of the business is packing prospectors that are searching for the lost Dutchman. We don't pack as many prospectors as we do treasure seekers. There's a big difference between treasure seekers and prospectors. Prospectors are looking for a vein, a clue in the mineral, and treasure seekers are operating from some map they picked up in a bar or something that their great uncle handed down to them, but they're looking for clues. Dutchman hunters come from all walks of life, all parts of the country. You have very wealthy men. You have the fella that hocked his mother's watch to rent a horse and get in here. And if they have a common denominator, it'd be the same one that a religious fanatic has. They believe.
The chances of making a gold strike only based on mineral evidence are 10,000 to 1. Some hedge their bet. They look for gold in the rock and in legend too. Jay Heston is a prospector and gold miner. He claims no bonanzas, but he has found gold.
One day I thought I would look into the Lost Dutchman mine down in Arizona. But the more I looked, the more I realized I was looking for adventure or something to do more than I was looking for a mine. I don't think there's a mine there at all. I think maybe somebody may have left off some treasure at one time or another, but I think it's long since lost.
With his lucky walking stick, he scours the West looking for more, a tedious and often dangerous venture. Since large gold deposits seldom lie on the surface, prospectors often use dynamite to blast out rock samples. More lost limbs and broken bodies can be attributed to accidents with dynamite than any other peril the prospector faces. Prospectors may shoot thousands of holes without hitting a rich vein of gold ore. Pockmarked with prospectors' holes, parts of the mountains look like the beachhead at Normandy on D-Day.
If your intuition is right, if your luck is right, you sometimes pick up some gold. You're always looking for something better than what you've got. The astrologers say that gold is related to the sun. Maybe we're looking for that. Well, I'd never seen gold in the rock before I came here. You take a rock off of a piece of property you bought, and you break it up, and you swirl the water around in a pan, and you see gold, and there's something fascinating about it.
Weaver's needle is synonymous with the glint of gold for those who go in search of the Lost Dutchman mine. The quest inevitably leads to the Apache Indians.
Sometimes Superstition Mountain, the way the Apache talks about it, sort of remind me of a place in Florida where the astronauts take off to go to outer space, because there's a place to go where you take off to the other world.
Philip Cassador is a traditional Apache in a modern world. He has spent most of his life studying the ways of his people. He is also a medicine man with deep knowledge of ancient Apache ritual and mythology.
To the Apache, I think the Lost Dutchman's mine has two different stories about it. One is what the white men tell and one what the Apache tells. I think there's Apache, when they talk about it, I think they talk about the secret cave. And in that secret cave is a lost Dutchman's mine.
The mountain spirit dance celebrates the Earth's creation. Apaches say the mountain spirits protect the superstitions, and any violence or tragedy attributed to the Apaches is really the work of the spirits who live in the sacred cave.
The Apache secret cave is a very secret cave. It's a very difficult thing to get inside of it, you know, because at one side, at the entrance, there's a female rattlesnake, and then one side there's a male rattlesnake, and there's 2 cups, you know, that's made out of abalone shell, one for a female and one for a male. And to get inside of it, you have to have the blue stone and the white stone. The white stone, if you're a female, and you put it into the abalone shell, and then the rattlesnake will come apart, and then you can go in there in that secret cave. Non-Indian people that go up there, they don't carry the blue stone, and they don't know the prayer that the Apache pray before they go into that mountain. And the prayer is only made for the Apache, and that mountain is set there for a purpose, and that purpose is for Apache. And so if they go in there without these kind of things, it can change your whole body and soul, your mind and everything, because you touch something that it should not be touched.
How the Dutchman's mine and the sacred cave became entwined is a mystery to the Apache. They maintain, however, that looking for gold is no excuse for violating the cave. Mysteries are Glenn McGill's business. He's a private detective in Oklahoma City. Patience and attention to detail are the virtues of his trade. McGill believes, with the right techniques, that any mystery can be solved, including the whereabouts of the Lost Dutchman mine.
The Lost Dutchman mine is a different world altogether. It's out of character for us who are in the investigation business to get involved in this sort of thing. Far out, as you might say.
In 1963, a group of Denver attorneys hired McGill to find the mine. With conviction and a spirit of adventure, he took the case. McGill thinks he found the mine in 1966, but not the vein of gold. In the fall of 1976, an amateur photographer documented McGill's 49th expedition into the superstitions. McGill admits spending thousands of dollars, as well as sacrificing family relations and business gains during his 14-year search for the gold. He is confident that he now knows where the gold is and believes the payoff will match the sacrifice.
Things come into focus at this very specific spot in the Superstition Mountains. The maps, the legend, the statements, the witnesses, our investigation, the evidence all comes together at one spot, and that's where we're digging. If our estimates are right, and we believe that they are, then the mine itself is composed of a vein of gold that is over 18 miles long.
McGill also believes the mine carries a curse that may be influencing his life.
It's no doubt taken some tolls upon me and my family and some of my very close friends. You might even say that it's been responsible for shortening my life to some degree. I'm not in the best of health today as I was when I first started this investigation.
Whether there is magic in Weaver's needle or not, it will undoubtedly remain the lodestone for new generations of seekers. The Dutchman said he found gold there. If it happened once, it could happen again.
Dutchman hunters have never been popular among the Apaches, who still regard the Superstition Mountains as sacred. The environmentalists don't like gold seekers either. They want to preserve the mountain as a wilderness area. The Apaches and the environmentalists have won their case in Congress. In 1984, the Superstition Mountains will be off limits to treasure hunters and prospectors. Passing a law is one thing, banishing a dream is another. The dream is constantly being revived by stories like the one told by prospector Milt Rose.
I talked to 3 men who were with the Dutchman when he died and helped draw the map that he drew. They drew me a map of this thing and put all the names and things on it that should be there. And then I went to look for it from there and found it. And there was gold there, and I got about $18,000 out of a pocket, which it proved to be, and it didn't last very long. The Lost Dutchman mine has no relation to the Superstitions or to the Weaver's Needle. It is in the Four Peaks country at about 4,800 feet in a big canyon.
My personal feeling about the Lost Dutchman mine is that there's more gold in my back teeth than there is in this whole range of mountains. And I just don't believe it's here. I've packed them in for 10 years and have yet to pack a ore sample out.
Even if you ground up the Superstition Mountains and ran them through a sieve and found not 1 ounce of gold, there are those who would say you should have dug a foot down deeper and you would have found the real gold.
People dream. They hear these stories and they're greedy. They think that God meant them to find this gold and reserved it for them, and they're going to go and find it, so they go in there by the thousands. There was over 10,000 people from 1878 to 1891 in the Superstitions before the Dutchman died and left his legend.